This reading is about self-awareness, which is egoic, or self-awareness, which is of the soul. Yesterday we had a question and answer period here. We spend 2 hours. We do it every few months. And the questions that come are, I think because they come with, they're so sincere, they're so deep for each person, both here and people watching online who are sending questions. It just seems to evoke some deep answers to be able to come through. It just pulls that energy. And one person wrote in it was so honest and so revealing, though I don't know who the questions are coming from, but it felt so personal, saying that he has a very disharmonious relationship with his wife. That's what he wrote. And he said he feels a lot of hatred and anger. Those were his words, not mine. And he knows that he should be able to look at her and everyone just as if they're God, but he hasn't been able to succeed at that yet, as I told him. But as I sat with it for a moment, the first thought that came was to suggest to him that he start listening to Swamiji's chants, and in particular, that he listen to Swami Ananda with Swamiji's voice, consciousness, energy coming through. Because when we're talking about things like hatred and anger, things so clearly of the ego, things that where we really feel the pull that Satan has on us, it's very hard to move beyond that. It's hard for all of us, whatever ways that we are bound here, and we're all bound. That's why we're here. So sometimes it's more subtle than hatred and anger, but it's there for us. And I said to him, just listen to the chant. I said, you don't even have to chant. And then I said, maybe even listen to some instrumental music, because with instrumental music, Swamiji's music, very high vibration, music that's been received by a soul that could open and receive God's presence and hear that music, feel that vibration. And it felt like a very good answer. There was more to it, but it just felt so right. And then this morning, when I've been sitting with the meaning of this reading, which is, what do we need to do to receive God? What do we need to do to even want to know God, but then to open and to receive that loving presence into our lives? And it's not something that many people do. I mean, those of us who are sitting here, obviously this is a little bit of preaching to the choir, but I bet there are many, 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 many times where we are stuck or in trouble or feeling outside of that center, and we don't always remember to call on God. I mean, it's wonderful. Here we are part of a real minority that's even wanting to think that way. Ramakrishna has an interesting analogy that goes so perfectly with this reading. He says, think of it like God is the wind and we are all sailors. And then he said, the first thing you have to do is untie your boat from the dock. And then he said, most people won't do that. Now think of it, it's such an obvious, brilliant, masterful analogy. You want to go out and sail, and most people won't untie their boat from the dock. Just to say how few are really ready to go out and sail or to know God when we think of that wind as grace in our lives. The next thing he said is that we have to set our sails so that we can receive and be guided by as much of that wind as possible. Again, as much grace. So these are beautiful analogies in this reading this morning, and I'm going to get back to the chanting in a moment. But in the reading, Swamiji just chose this beautiful reading from the Bible, which says, I am the vine and you are the branches. So God is saying to us, I am the source of all cosmic consciousness, and you are the branches that will drink from this source if you remember to receive it. There's an unending, literally infinite source of cosmic energy in the form of whatever we need: love, peace, calmness, wisdom, an infinite supply. Master used to speak about the sun a lot, as many of you know. And I couldn't find this talk last night, but I remember many years ago now, Jyotish and Devi gave a service. I think it was on this reading, but I'm not certain. But Jyotish was talking about the sun, and he was talking about how big the sun was and how much energy the sun had. And he said there's a million Earths could fit across the diameter of the sun. It's huge. He was just trying to give us some sense. And what I remember he said is if the sun was filling up this room, the Earth would be like a dot, a period, at the end of a sentence in Sacramento. And he said the sun would still be influencing that period. That's the amount of energy that's there. And Master used to say to us, you should sunbathe some period of every day. You should be out in the sun. But he said, if you sunbathe consciously, you will receive 100 times the energy from the sun that you'll receive if you do it unconsciously. And the analogy here is that that branch, that vine, is an infinite source of energy. Just like we all know, we all take it for granted, if the sun were to disappear for a second, less than a second, life as we know it would cease to exist. We know that. We all know that. We've studied this science. Everything in an instant. What we don't realize is that there is an infinite source of cosmic energy that in that same way is guiding every one of us. And were it to disappear, life as we know it would disappear. Now, it's really hard to hold on to that because we live in this world of smoke and mirrors. We actually think that the consciousness of our mind is what's running the show. We think it all the time. We feel we have to solve problems. We have to be working everything out. Things feel too big for us. And we need to remember that simple act of asking for God's help. And as soon as we ask for that help, then that infinite source of energy can flow. Usually we think of it as flowing into our hearts. in the form of devotion. But it is what's guiding everything. As human beings, we've been given the power to even remember to call on God, to even think to call on God. But when we don't, then we're outside of all of what's sustaining us. One of the other questions yesterday that was, it at first could seem so simple, but it was so profound to me. Somebody said, I really want to be letting God guide me and support me. But when I ask to receive things that are right for me, that will help me neutralize karma, move on spiritually, she said, sometimes it's really hard. Like what comes, you ask to be guided, and it's very hard. What can we do in those instances? And first, the thought came to me, what extraordinary grace that she and we would even think to ask God for help. It's just such grace because, again, like what Ramakrishna said, the vast majority of the people in the world don't. Can you imagine this? That there are people who go a week or 2 weeks or a month and they never think about God. They never realize what is holding us together, what is sustaining us, where our love comes from, where discrimination and intuition come from. Most people are really feeling, and they are stuck in it. Now, I don't want to stay with that and be too negative. That's not the point. But as Swamiji said in one of his, I don't even know where I read this now, but it's in my mind. He said most people are like horses that have been drawing a cart for years and years and years. And no matter how much you try and convince that horse, you know, it's much easier if you go this other way. We're going to take a new route today. No, the horse knows where it's going. I remember one time I was dog sitting for friends who live in Menlo Park, and they told me I had to walk the dog every day. And I said, well, where should I walk him? They said, don't worry. I didn't know what they meant, but I got outside. It was a big dog, and I loved the dog. But that dog just took me on the walk, because when you don't have what we have as human beings, that's what you can do. And it is what many human beings still do. They're convinced that the way that they've been seeing the world is what it is. And what this reading is telling us is that's not at all the case. And what came to me yesterday is you keep calling on God, because remember, and we all need to remember this, there's so much in this world we cannot do. There's so much that's hard for us, so many obstacles to overcome. But of course, as Master said, there's no such thing as obstacles. There are only opportunities. That's what happens at a soul level. It's not what happens at the ego level. The ego level, there's problems. Master said an interesting thing when he was writing about courage. He said, well, 2 things I'll share with you. One is, he said, the soul makes no notion of whether, let me just think for 1 minute. It's not, it could be success or failure, but those aren't the words. Now I'm losing them. I had them. What it said is whether something looks good or bad, a success or a failure, a pain or a pleasure, the soul takes no notice, because to the soul, it's either way, it's just defining our limitations. And that's true, because it's all from the point of view of the ego. Is this good or bad? Is this right or wrong? The soul doesn't notice that. And if we keep remembering to step onto this path with the divine, if we keep remembering where our power comes from, then we're living from soul consciousness, from self-awareness, not self-awareness. And it's such an important point. You remember what Yogananda said to his great disciple, Rajarsi Janakananda, this man who was brilliant and hardworking and had made millions of dollars back when that was a lot of money, and was moving in and out of samadhi. And Master looked at him and said to him, "Don't forget where your power comes from. Don't forget." And Rajarsi, like a little boy, says, "I won't, Master. It comes from you." So to remember that, to even know that. So when this woman said to me, "It's really hard," I told her, because I happened to be teaching a course on, well, I'm teaching it on the essentials of the path, but we're talking about courage right now. And it just couldn't have been more appropriate than for this talk. But Master said, "Make no mistake," these are Master's words now, not mine, "to know God, to get on the path and move towards knowing God, takes all of the courage and strength that you possess." These are his words. He was very precise when he spoke. To remember that we are branches and that what we want to be doing is receiving our sustenance from the vine. It's really the only way. He says we'll take all of the courage and all of the strength that we possess. So when this woman said to me, "But it's hard," I said, "It's hard. Master admits it's hard." He also says don't take any notice of how hard it is, because it's in walking into that with God that frees us. That's how we move on this path, is that we don't avoid any of the obstacles that are put here. We don't avoid the hard roads. We don't turn around and look away in denial. We look right at it. And as soon as we do that, as soon as we say, "I need some help here. I want to meet this problem. I want to see it as an opportunity to grow spiritually." That's what we're talking about. Master said in all of these lessons, these are discipleship notes that Swami Kriyananda took. These are quotes from Master. He said, "Everything I teach you is predicated on the fact that you need to want to know God." And again, it sounds so simple, but it's not where we always are. So once we want to know God, once we remember to call on God, then God comes forth and helps us. He's able to enter and help us. I was trying to remember just before service. This is so terrible. I wrote Sai Ganesh last night and he wrote it to me. Then this morning I forgot it again. There you have it. But the definition of self-realization, the definition is the knowing in all parts of body, mind, and soul that we are now in possession of the kingdom of God. We are now in possession. We are a branch. And we don't need to keep praying for that to be revealed. All we need to do is increase our knowing. And I said to this woman yesterday, every time we reach out for God's help, we are increasing our knowing, because the soul loves that. The soul loves for us to remember our source. And as we give it permission, every time we can remember to talk to God, to open our hearts, is really what we're talking about. It's our purification ceremony, because that is how God will enter. Otherwise, he cannot enter. But every time we do that, we please the soul, and the soul begins to take up, I would say, more room. It begins to remember who we are. It remembers, we begin to remember, and we empower the soul to help us live more from that place of soul consciousness and less from ego. So even if we don't win that battle, whatever that battle is, we've made progress. We've made great progress. So that is what we need to keep doing. Now, this morning when I was listening to this chant, this is just a moment in time. And these are just words if it didn't happen for you. But I'd like to offer the experience, because remember, I said to the man who was filled with hatred and anger, listen to Swamiji's chants. Don't try and reason with it. You can't. The instant you try and reason, the very instant you've given the ego all of the power it needs to win the battle. You will not win. The slope is way too slippery and too steep. So we have to get out of our minds. And when Master said chanting is half the battle, I realized yesterday how much progress that man could make if he would actually do that, if he would start listening to Swamiji singing his music and Master's music. And this morning, when they were chanting, fill my body, fill my spirit with the sound of Om, it's exactly what the reading is. I am going to drink from the well of cosmic consciousness, and I will feel filled, body, mind, and soul, with the very vibration that has created everything, with that which is the divine. I will feel God's love, and that affirmation, that prayer demand, really, fill my body, fill my spirit, fill me with the sound of Om. And Helen just picked right up on it and went into our meditation. But I felt, oh my God, there was so much power in that chant. If you didn't hear it that way, play it, listen to it. It's exactly what we want. And I was so grateful that really Master told that man, listen to my chants if you want to come home. And then I had said to him, maybe even start with some instrumentals so you're not bothered by the words. And then Karen comes up and plays so beautifully. Now, we know the words to the song, but if you didn't listen to the words, or think the words in your mind, if you just let the vibration of every note fill you, you could be so much closer to knowing God, to living not in the place of self-reliance, not in the place that is dooming us to failure. We cannot move through life that way. We can be around for as long as we want, but anything that will take us into that state of self-reliance, of soul consciousness, anything, asking God for help, listening to these chants, listening to an instrumental piece of music, receiving it with our entire being, letting that vibration fill us so that eventually we become it. We have been given ears to hear. We want to receive God. We remember to write a question that says, help, I'm filled with anger and hatred. Help, this feels so hard. And Master says, yep, it's really hard. I made it that way. It's going to take all of your courage, all of your strength. Never give up. I want to close by reading I Need the Ray's book. Lakshmi probably took it back there with her. Because I want to read the reading from the Gita, holding it in this light that everything is the divine. We're the divine to turn his back on us. We're that energy to leave. We could not sustain this life. We are simply a channel. It is only our job to say, I need you. To always remember so many things we can't do on our own, but they can do everything. All we need to do, as these masters said to me once, and most of you have heard it now, if you forget who's in charge, if you forget who's doing this, and I'm sharing this with everyone, it's true for every one of us, find the nearest altar. Turn inside, go into your heart, and say, this is bigger than me. This needs you. And the more we do that, it's just like open the channel, call on God, raise our energy. So this reading from the Gita is so beautiful. It says, everyone in this world whose life is glorious or prosperous or powerful, those are all good things, glorious, prosperous, powerful, know that his achievement is but a little spark from the great sun of my effulgence. God himself saying to us, we are a spark of the divine, and remember it. Remember that the kingdom of God is already ours. All we need to do is improve our knowing.